This episode is sponsored by Cuties. That's Kyoottees. Cuties is a brand from Hawaii and made in Hawaii, serving adorable stickers and apparel. You can find designs and stickers there sure to make you smile. Visit their store at etsy.com/shop/cuties.
Hello, everybody. This is Megan.
And this is Alana.
And welcome to Tea Time Crimes. Man, you really hit that Hawaii pronunciation hard, huh?
Hawaii.
Yeah, nailed it. How you doing?
Nailed it. I'm doing okay. All my
Just okay?
fingernails are breaking.
I'm sorry, what?
All my fingernails are breaking.
Like, that sounds like a very 1950s housewife problem, but I assume that they're probably breaking because you either dug in some sort of toxic naturalist wasteland or like got hit in rugby and they're all bruised and falling off.
No, I don't. Well, first of all, I normally really don't paint my fingernails. And second of all, when I do, it is not gel. And for the wedding, I got gel so it'd stick on. And then I never went to the place again to get them off properly. And then I tried to do it myself and I just like wrecked my nails and now they're all breaking. So it's fun.
Ew.
Yeah.
That's a problem I've never had. Never thought about it.
Me either.
The dogs are in here with me because this is usually where they live when they see me come through with my podcast stuff. They run in here to get into their big, huge cage kennel, but we moved the cage and they're still in here. They're like,
right.
Where did it go?
That's so cute.
Yeah.
Habits.
So
Dog have
they're
habits.
just in here laying down. And we moved it because Harlow tried to dig a hole through the carpet when we left him with a pet sitter for the first time. So
yeah, you had a nice vacation except for that. He figured it out eventually, right? When he got moved.
Yeah, when he got moved to a tile floor.
Where he's just
He's got to be husky. I just know it.
Oh yeah, sounds.
They say he's a Pyrenees, but come on now. He's definitely part husky.
Oh, that's for sure in there.
So if you hear heavy breathing, there's not a stalker in here with me. It's Harlow trying to find something to do. Yeah, he's just in the corner like,
oh. He's just cute.
Yeah, he's cute, but he's trouble. We've had to go to the emergency vet. He found a dead animal and ran around with it while the pet sitter was here. He tried to dig through the carpet.
Traumatic for the pet sitter.
Yeah, she was amazing. But yeah, I'm back from vacation. It was great, other than I got an allergic reaction on my face.
Yeah, that's not fun.
Today's the first day I look normal. It was pretty brutal. You saw the progression.
Yeah, that was not fair. That shouldn't be allowed on vacation.
I look like I was trying to do some sort of weird makeup. I was into some sort of weird role play that I was not into. It didn't look good. Anyway, do you have a tea?
This is a gift.
This is a gift.
And it's very fancy. I don't know how to say some of the words.
Perfect.
It is TWGT, which is very fancy tea. The finest teas in the world. Grand Cru Prestige. So these TWG tea hand-sewn 100% cotton tea bags allow our whole leaf teas to develop their full and unique aroma and give them ample room to expand during infusion.
I've never heard such a vivid description of the actual tea bag, like the least important part of the tea.
Yeah, I haven't even gotten into the tea description.
Oh, I thought that was it.
This is 1837 black tea is this type of tea. A timeless classic with notes of fruits and flowers from the Bermuda Triangle, which leaves a lingering aftertaste of ripe berries, anise, and caramel.
The Bermuda Triangle?
I know, that's interesting.
What the heck does that mean? Isn't the Bermuda Triangle water?
No, I think it's the triangle between, isn't it between 3 islands?
The water between 3 islands.
Gotta look this up. Well, then it's the islands.
Make a note so that
Oh,
you can
yeah.
update us on Instagram
Well,
once you figure this out.
I gotta pull up my to-do list.
This would have been the perfect tea for our last episode.
Yeah, that's true.
People who vanish.
Bermuda.
Well, you're supposed to do it later, not on the fly here.
I have to put on my to-do list or I'll forget.
Oh my gosh, that's what we're watching. You type one-handed as your to-do list. We're not even getting an immediate. She's like, it would take me the same amount of time to Google it and to put it on my to-do list.
No. It smells very fruity and very creamy, so I'm nervous.
It smells creamy? Gross. Next, you're going to tell me it smells moist. I'm going to punch you.
Can't hit me.
I'll fly down to New Orleans.
Too far away.
You're too fast for me anyway. I would lose steam real quick.
Especially in this heat.
I mean, just the ride to the airport, I'd probably give up. Like, well, it was a good idea.
This is a good tea. You can tell it's quality. You can tell it has a decent body. It's not that big. Like
nothing to write home about.
It's not as luscious as an Irish breakfast, say. But you could say it's moist, and you could say that it does have enough body to take you through the morning. So let's get one more sip here.
That sounds so gross. I don't even know what that means.
There is a little bit of a depth. Like it fools you with like berries and flowers and a caramel river, but it has a dark side, and it kind of wants you to know about it.
It sounds like you.
Oh, love it. This is an intriguing thumbs up.
Oh, an intriguing thumbs up.
Yeah.
All right.
I enjoy it. It's good.
All right. Who is it a gift from?
One of our favorite cafe owners locally.
No, you said that like when you say we, I assume you mean me. And then it took me a minute to realize you meant.
Oh, I love that.
I'll hide my hurt. Move on.
Hey,
okay.
You love it.
Yeah, it's true. I would love it. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
Hold on. I've also lost my stand, so I'm trying to use stuffed animals that are present.
Stop. As long as it's not Slappy.
No, Slappy. He's retired from baseball clinic. He's sleeping on the couch.
Oh, okay.
So I've been pretty interested in finding some more obscure stories for us to talk about. Ones that aren't national headlines or maybe only appeared in the media for a few weeks after we did, Nora and Ella, those ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I searched through tons of local papers, not local to me, but just local papers in different cities.
Yeah.
Until I found a story that I didn't know, never heard of, but one that also had enough for me to cover it, which is sometimes the issue because I don't have access to every single database in the world. I'm sure there are databases I don't have access to that would help, but for what I have access to. And the story I found for today is the murder of Rose Torrence. Rose was a Black woman in the 1950s. And one of the things I've noticed in my experience, because we do historical cases, records and media coverage for women of color is like 100 plus years behind what it is for white women. So like what I can find for a case on a white woman in the late 1800s or early 1900s is what I was kind of able to find for Rose in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And even then, a lot of the information I found changes, making it harder to find information that is out there. For instance, I still have no idea when Rose was actually born. I don't know what her real birth date.
Jeez, and it's only the 1950s.
I know what her real birth date was. I'm not even sure Rose is her preferred name because she appears as Rose, Rosie, and Rosa.
Gotcha. I'm
going to go with Rose because that's what was in her obituary. And usually the families approve the obituaries, at least today. So I'm going to go with Rose just because I had to pick one. And also her last name was sometimes spelled differently. So for each search I did, I had to do it 10 times over with different birth dates, different spellings, different name variations. And it was stressing me out a little bit, but I didn't want my perfectionism to get in the way of being able to tell at least parts of the story. So there's some of it that I don't know, but I still wanted to tell the story.
Yeah.
So on Monday, January 19th, 1953, it was the last time that Willie Torrence saw his wife, Rose. On Tuesday, Willie called the police and learned that a body of a woman matching Rose's description had been found stuffed in a sewer at Utoy disposal plant and discovered by employees.
No.
Willie and longtime boarder Major Bailey went to identify the body, which was in fact Rose Torrence. She had been severely beaten, both of her legs broken below the knee. She was fully dressed, wearing a gray skirt made of flannel and a red shirt. One of her black shoes was missing. She had bruising on her forehead and several lethal wounds to the back of her head. Willie was devastated, called their daughter, Willina, who was attending Fisk University in Tennessee. She came home right away. Rose's funeral was held at Liberty Baptist Church by Reverend G.W. Dudley on January 25th, 1953. The initial theory was that this was a hit-and-run accident where the driver hid Rose's body once they realized that she had died from the impact. This was a first guess based on the odd breaks in her legs. That's all it was a guess. By the end of the week, the papers report that detectives are confident Rose's murder was not racially motivated. However, the next breath of that sentence is that Rose's home had been attacked with dynamite a few years prior to her death.
What?
Yeah, so we'll get into that. So who is Rose Torrence? According to census data, so I now have a subscription to Ancestry.com.
All right.
Rose Bradley was born in Georgia, and her parents were as well. The year of her birth, I'm not sure. 1907, 1913. I saw a bunch of different ones. Not sure any of those are correct. But it can kind of, she's obviously not born in 1940, right? Like we can kind of understand. Rose married Willie Torrence in 1922 when she was said to be 13 and he was 19. Again, this is all a guess because she's listed in the 1930 census as 23. Then 10 years later, she's listed as 27. So that's not right.
It's TTC math.
Yeah, it really is. I was like, I'm sorry. Was I in my past life a census person in the 1940s? It just went around and was like, that's close enough. Based on military records, Willie served in World War I from July of 1918 to 1919. His birthday was listed originally as 1900 and then corrected as 1893. So there's too many ages floating around for either one of them for me to know. My guess is she was very young when she got married, a teenager for sure.
Like it.
Whether she was 13
trauma from World War I, I'll tell you that.
18. Yeah. Further digging into public records showed that they had a child in November of 1922, the same year they were said to be married. Sadly,
I really hope she wasn't 13.
I know. This child was only alive for 20 minutes before it died. I know. Traumatic. And that was from me digging through public records. There's no mention of this in the paper to kind of paint Rose as, a whole person. The 1930 census had the couple living in Atlanta with Willie's 11-year-old brother-in-law, Ike. And Rose was listed that she did not have an education, but it was noted that her and Willie could read and write. That was a question that they asked on the census. By the 1940 census, the couple now had a 7-year-old daughter of their own, Willina, who I mentioned earlier, and they lived at 899 Hunter Street, Northwest Atlanta. Willina Torrence was born in January of 1932, which is almost 10 years after the child that they lost.
Yeah, wow.
Somewhere between the 1940 census and her death, Rose became quite the businesswoman, starting her own business making and selling hair products via mail order.
Cool.
Which then led to her becoming a property owner. She was said to have 3 boarding houses at the time of her death and making $800 to $1,000 a month from her rentals and her hair products.
Get it, girl.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but dang, if it is, that's in 1950s time too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So on March 5th, 1949, a home that Rose owned at 359 Ashby Street Southwest was bombed with dynamite, which is the incident I saw referenced earlier.
That's wild.
And it happened after Rose bought the home located in a mostly white neighborhood.
Yeah.
The bombing happened when no one was in the building, so luckily no one was hurt, but it was so severe that it was heard a mile away.
I mean, it's fucking dynamite.
I know, right?
It's crazy.
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
Now, after the bombing, at the end of April, a woman by the name of Rosa Mae Williams moved into the home. It took me a minute to understand if this was Rose herself and they got the name confused, but I think this was actually a separate woman named Rosa Mae.
Okay.
And she was staying in the home rent-free. So my guess is that Rose was trying to help her out and was like, here's some parts of a house. You can stay there for free. It's better than being homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And you can stay here rent-free. But was told that she had to vacate by the city for safety reasons because the foundation is fractured. Some parts of the floor are missing. So the city was like, you can't stay here until we inspect it and like fix some things. Rose Torrence was served the actual paper saying that the boarders or I don't know what you'd call them, renters, but not, had to vacate since she owned the home. And she said she would make the repairs needed and then she was going to move in there with her own family.
Okay.
Rosa Mae told the police that when her family moved into this home, a white man approached them and he told them that the neighborhood was a white neighborhood.
Oh, get a life.
Rosa Mae went on to say that the man did not explicitly threaten her or her family, but it was obvious the meaning behind his words.
It's implied there, bro.
Yeah, he wasn't part of the welcome committee, right? He was there for one reason only, to make it very clear that they were not happy with the fact that this was owned by a Black woman and now a Black family was living in it. The interaction, as well as the recent bombing, led police to stand guard of the home since the tenants were actually not required to leave for 30 days, which made me think, well, how unsafe is this house? If they're like, hey, floors are missing, but you can stay for a month. I'm not really sure. Like, wouldn't that be kind of like, hey, let's speed it up and get an inspection going? So I don't know how bad it actually was. But for whatever reason, police didn't believe that the previous incident was connected to Rose's murder, despite the fact that she was also about to buy another property described as, quote, near a white community. So maybe the police are right. Maybe the two things had nothing to do with each other. But the world Rose was living in was dangerous long before her murder. We don't have a clear date for Rose's birth, but around the time she was born in the fall of 1906, the Atlanta race riots broke out. Tensions had been building since the Civil War, and that year was an election year where Black Atlanteans were portrayed as a threat to white Atlanteans. Even though segregation was happening and equal opportunity was not happening.
They still felt threatened.
Black men and women were actually able to rise up to middle class.
It's awesome.
And the election preyed on this fear. The riot was then triggered by accusations that Black men had assaulted a white woman, although this was unjustified. The riot was violent. White men, and I assume women, destroyed businesses that were owned by Black families, and they attacked Black citizens. As many as 40 African Americans were thought to have died as a result of this. So that's what Rose is being born into. That's around the time we think Rose was born. Then Rose would have grown up in segregation. Jim Crow laws were very much present in 1950. It would be years before the laws were overturned and even longer before they were actually implemented. So in Atlanta in 1948, so right before Rose's murder, 8 African-American policemen were hired to the force. Only 8. By 1960, that number had increased to only 31. And then segregation would remain among the officers until almost 1970.
That's so recent.
I know.
I would say that's 30 years ago because I just think
we think
that's how
1990. But I could not find the exact statistics for 1953, the year that Rose was murdered. But in 1960, this is the breakdown of segregation from the Atlanta University Center, Robert W. Woodruff Library. So in Atlanta, there were 42 white parks, 3 Black parks. 12 white swimming pools, 3 Black swimming pools. 16 white rec centers, 3 Black rec centers. 4,000 white hospital beds, 780 Black hospital beds.
Oh, so stupid.
Schools and hospitals were supposed to stop segregation in 1954 and 1962, respectively, but desegregation didn't happen in schools until 61 and hospitals in 1965 in Atlanta. And this is just a study on quantity. This isn't even addressing quality, right?
Quality, right, which
this is just the numbers.
Awful.
There were also so many regulations and laws working against Rose as a Black woman owning property. We know today there are still credit and income inequities between men and women in different races. But I listened to an episode of Fresh Air where they had the guest Richard Rothstein, who's the author of The Color of Law. And he gave a brief history that painted a real picture of what Rose would have been up against being a homeowner at this time.
Yeah.
So the Depression, Rose lived through the Depression, right? Around the time she would have been not a newlywed, but her and Willie would have been kind of starting out their life and the Depression would have hit. I forgot to mention, Willie worked as an embalmer. That was his job, his profession.
No.
I know. Yeah. But anyway, in 1933, Public Works started building public homes because there was a huge housing shortage because no construction had happened during the Depression. And so many people had lost their homes.
Sure.
So people had nowhere to live. So they start building these public housing communities, but they segregated them, which nobody asked them to do. They just did it. And then in 1934, the Federal Housing Administration was formed, which had racial restrictions on homes in certain areas. So entire subdivisions were built, and they were only allowed to be sold to white people and resold to white people.
Seems fair.
So these organizations created maps that showed geographically where mortgages would be considered safe. And then they would redline Black neighborhoods as unsafe. You weren't able to buy a home. Furthermore, there were methods used to physically separate white from Black communities. In some cases, literal walls were erected to separate them if they were close.
Oh,
and then
God.
They said that highways were a good way to do it.
Wow.
So the reasons these restrictions were put in place were said to be because, very offensively, that integrated neighborhoods would reduce property value.
That's so gross.
I know. And Rothstein points out that this assumption is in no way based on any study. He said this wasn't even proven. And he said, in fact,
it's just racism.
We believe it's the opposite because Black homeowners would often pay more for a house in a neighborhood, which would actually increase
interesting.
the property value because they had so few choices.
Oh, interesting. I mean, that's not a good thing, but I hear,
That's still the case today, right? Like if somebody buys a house down the street and it goes for more than you were expecting, that's always a good thing because then you can sell your house for more.
Right.
So then after World War II, the GI Bill was created to help veterans get back on their feet, own a home, but they adopted the same restrictions as the FHA, the Federal Housing Association.
Really?
So they had the same restrictions, yes. And over time, what ended up happening is the public housing ended up having waiting lists for Black renters and openings for white renters because white communities were encouraged to go buy a single family home in the new subdivision and then give in low mortgages so that they could afford it. So the Fair Housing Act of 1968 lifted these restrictions, but Rothstein points out that it's now harder at this time for African Americans to catch up because what they could have afforded 30 or 40 years ago is no longer the same price. And unlike white homeowners who now have 30 to 40 years of equity, they're behind.
Yeah.
And these white homeowners were paying less by purchasing the homes for monthly mortgage than they were being charged for rent. So it was really setting up this unfair situation. And then on top of that, home equity would then be used for things like college or for other purchases or for generational wealth. Like your house would be
general
left
advancement
to your kids. So Rose buying a home is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I imagine she's just going and paying cash.
Right?
You know?
That's wild.
And then Rose buying a home in a white neighborhood.
Yeah, watch out.
Is even more so.
I love her already.
I know, right? So all this is going on. Additionally, you've got things like the KKK.
Yeah.
Which started in the 1800s, but historians have tracked the increased activity around things like World War I. Their recruiting became, because people, when a war breaks out, people are generally volatile and they capitalize
and
on
more scared
this,
too.
And scared. They capitalize on this fear and they perfected their recruiting and they grew. And then again in the 1950s, They were very active, and the KKK
Yes, they
officially
were.
became organized in Atlanta in 1955, which is just 2 years after Rose's death. So I have to
Go
imagine
fuck yourselves.
they hadn't been there. It's not like they weren't there and then they suddenly were in
Oh
1955.
yeah,
It was
definitely
very
not.
present while Rose was alive.
Yeah.
So Rose's murder is right in the middle of all of this violent tension,
God.
with the added coincidence of her being about to purchase a new property, quote, near a white community. I don't think that's an aspect that I could ignore, and I wanted to bring it up. All that's going on. But a month after Rose's murder, a 45-year-old black man named Major Bailey was arrested and charged with Rose's murder. If you remember, this is the man who went with Willie to ID the body. Yeah.
Yeah.
He said originally that Rose had left the home Monday morning with Willie, and that was the last time he'd seen her. Then on Tuesday, when he learned she'd not returned home Monday night, he became concerned, as did Willie, so that's when they called the police. Bailey had boarded with the Torrance family for the last 14 years. That's a really long time.
Yeah.
According to police, the motive for the murder was an argument between Bailey and Rose over selling his car. Like I mentioned, Rose was about to purchase another property and she needed $3,000, I guess, to complete the purchase. In Bailey's confession, it stated that Rose asked him to sell his car for $1,000. There were also rumors that Bailey and Rose were having an affair. Bailey, who is listed as a brick mason or a construction worker, was charged with 2 counts of murder. One that stated the cause of death was from the head injuries Rose sustained before she was placed in the sewer, and another that stated placing her in the sewer along with the horrific wounds were a combined cause of death.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say place in the sewer, what does that mean? Is it like in the gutter? Is it in the sewer? Like, I'm trying to imagine.
I know.
I don't want to, but
I have questions about it too. I want to get to it a little later because I can't picture it either. I also don't know what a 1950s sewer in Atlanta looked like.
Yeah.
So maybe it was different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have questions about it. The Alabama Tribune quotes the second count as the following. Bailey killed Mrs. Torrance by striking and beating her with some instrument to the grand jurors unknown, thereby knocking the said Rose Torrance onto and against objects to the grand jury unknown, and by picking the said Rose Torrance up and dropping her through a sewer opening into a sewer line, thereby inflicting upon the said Rose Torrance mortal wounds from which she died. And I read her, it was actually, her name was Rosie in that excerpt, but I automatically read it as Rose by mistake.
So I bet it was a manhole. What do you call that? Manhole?
That's what I'm thinking. Yes. Bailey's confession admitted to dumping Rose's body on Willis Mill Road, and she was later discovered at the plant, which was not far from there. The state was hoping for the death penalty. The trial for Bailey started in April of 1953, but ended quickly in a mistrial.
What?
Bailey's defense attorney, Reuben Garland, told the court that detectives had conversed with a member of the jury, which was all white, by the way. Now the juror said that he did not talk with any witnesses or police, but he did know and was friendly with a lawyer by the name of General Paul Webb. And Webb claimed that they'd known each other for a long time and didn't know that he was on a jury, that they'd just kind of seen each other in passing kind of thing, and nothing had been talked about. But either way, the judge ruled it enough to declare a mistrial.
Wow. Wait, is Bailey black or white?
Black.
Okay.
By May, a second trial was sufficiently underway. And remember, the police had a signed confession from Bailey, but they don't really have any evidence, at least none that they reported in the papers. There's no witnesses of the murder.
Isn't confession enough?
There's no physical evidence. The best the DA had is a few witnesses who say they saw Rose and Bailey together Monday night, which is a different time than when he last saw her, or so he said. Bailey's legal team claims that the confession was obtained under duress. The detectives who took the confession were cross-examined for hours by Bailey's legal team, and details defining what duress was are not revealed in the papers. The police maintained their stance that the confession was given freely by Bailey. So that really is what it comes down to. Bailey himself took the stand and claimed to know nothing about the murder and only signed the confession because he was ordered to do so by the police. He relayed that the arresting officer told him, if you want to get out of here, you sign this. So he signed a piece of paper. After he signed it, and only after he signed it, was it read to him, and it contained the confession.
Yikes.
That's according to Bailey.
Right.
Bailey vehemently denied that he and Rose were involved in any way romantically or that he was giving her money in any way.
Okay.
He said that he had gotten along really well with both Rose and Willie until obviously now, because he's accused of murdering her. In addition to questioning the validity of the confession, the defense also called several witnesses to describe Bailey's character. By the end of May, the jury was not convinced that Bailey was guilty, and the trial was again dismissed because a verdict could not be reached and the jury was deadlocked.
Wow.
Yeah. I could find no mention of a third trial and no record of what happened to Major Bailey after this.
Really?
Nothing. So is it possible that Bailey murdered Rose? I mean, sure.
I guess.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Is it also possible that Rose's murder was a hate crime? I think also yes. And we're never going to know the truth, but what really bothers me, there's no evidence, like there's no coroner's report that I could find. The fact that Rose's legs were broken below the knee and her wounds were so brutal, her head wounds, my first instinct was that sounds like a group of people attacked her.
Yeah, beating.
Yes. Not.
Oh, I want to get revenge.
Not one man, because what I would like to know, again, is the same thing as you're talking about. What were the dimensions of the sewer? Were her legs broken post-mortem so that she could fit?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I thought of like all of the trunk cases that we've done. I know that's gruesome, but all of the trunk cases that we've talked about. But they don't say. I got the feeling that because they thought it was a car accident, I get the feeling that everything happened at once. And then I think she was probably placed in, like you said, like whatever those things are called, like the huge lid.
Yep.
Placed in, and that to me just reeks of more than one person.
Totally.
All of those wounds, like more than one person coming at her, attacking her from behind, hitting her in the knees.
Right, because it's not like she's a feeble person, like she'd be able to fight back, but it does sound like she was unable to.
Well, the other thing too is she was hit in the back of the head. I feel the story they created, and again, this is just I don't know what I'm doing. Like I've got no qualifications for anything I'm about to say, but when I picture it, Major Bailey, the story they're spinning is that the two of them were in an affair and they get in an argument over money. That's face to face.
Yeah.
Usually. That's just so gruesome. I mean, she was attacked in the back from behind.
I know.
And then her legs were broken.
Did he have any injuries?
I don't think so. That's the other thing I don't know. I don't know anything about him. Was he married? Was he a violent man? Did he have an arrest record? Was he the nicest guy ever? How did Willie feel about him?
Put anything.
Nothing. There's nothing about him other than that he worked and that he lived there for 14 years.
There were character witnesses, but we didn't see what they said.
I didn't see their transcript, no. I would love to know. There's nothing even that Willie said. Like, what did Willie think? Did Willie go in support of Major Bailey and say, there's no way he killed my wife? Or was he upset that this ended in a deadlock? I don't know. Because you'd think that he would be the best person to discern after 14 years of living with this man. Like, yeah, they probably were having an affair and he's a violent man and this is a possible scenario. Or he'd be like, this is absolutely ridiculous and no way possible. Doesn't mean he's always right. I mean, people surprise you all the time and do terrible things out of nowhere. But there was nothing to pull what Willie thought, or Willina, who is a college student at this time and old enough to know. I mean, she would have grown up with this man.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, God, that's so frustrating.
So there is no justice for Rose in this case. It's very telling that this jury couldn't decide.
Right. I mean, and you'd think like an all-white jury would jump on it, and if the fact that they couldn't it is very telling, like you say.
That makes me think they're like, I don't know. And I was trying to find a census data for Major Bailey because I was curious, could he read and write? Because it specified that
couldn't.
Rose could. And so that's another part of it. If he couldn't and they were like, just sign your name. I mean, they could have also just given him, they could have hid the paper from him. And if what he said is true, right, he could have been able to read and they still could have tricked him. But that would have been another piece of it. If he couldn't read and write, then how is this confession coming about? Who's taking it? What did it sound like? Did it sound like how Major Bailey speaks? You know what I mean? All of those things weren't present. And so you can't really piece it together.
Yeah. Wow.
Willie Torrence passed away just a few years later in 1956. His funeral was held at the same church by the same reverend that had done Rose's funeral.
Jeez.
Willina Torrence, who was studying piano at Fisk University at the time of Rose's death,
wow.
finished school at Atlanta University and did postgrad at Georgia State. Willina married and started her own family, becoming the mother of 2 girls, and was awarded Teacher of the Year in 1978. I know. In total, Willina was a teacher from 1956 to 1988. She was also a classically trained pianist and gave piano lessons during and after her teaching career. She holds the distinction of being the first African American to play in an Atlanta symphony concert.
Cool.
Willina passed away in 1997 and is buried in the same cemetery as both of her parents.
Oh.
Ugh. So think of everything that Rose survived up until this point.
Brutal.
Like, just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's an awful time. I mean, it's a really hard time to be Black. Fucking Jim Crow.
Getting married at 13, 14, 15 years old,
Yeah.
losing your first
Ugh.
child, your husband's back from World War I. Who knows what Willie was
Yeah.
like? We don't know what Rose was like either. I mean, there's
Right.
no... I think the only reason that this was covered as much as it even was because Rose was described as wealthy. And that was like a fascinating aspect.
I see. Okay. Got it.
Because I thought about, I'm like, this is such a gruesome way to dispose of a body. Like, how many trunk murders do we see all over the place?
Yeah.
And that sensationalism gets it covered in the media. But
Right.
they didn't really go into details. I think it's because she was so wealthy and owned so many properties, which was so unusual for the time, that it was even in the papers I could find.
Right. Right.
I mean, I can't get a vibe of how Rose was. I mean, the only thing we can...
She's savvy businesswoman.
Yeah,
is all
she's
I
savvy.
can really
She's
pick up
smart.
on.
She's a hard worker, because to do the mail order hair products, think about that. She must have had to make them.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to that.
Package them, take the orders, mail them.
Send
It was a
off.
whole
Yep.
operation that she did.
Yeah.
And then she's managing tenants as well.
Right.
Willie's down at the funeral home.
Ugh.
She's raising a 7. Well, I mean, I don't know why I said 7. She's only after 8. She's on her own, but she's like raising a child because the census had her at 7. Just unbelievable strength and courage. Obviously, I don't know if she was funny. I don't know if she loved to read. I don't know if she liked to sing. Like, those things are all lost. All those details that would be fascinating to know. And probably, I mean, her grandkids are probably still alive, and they might know.
Yeah.
Maybe it was passed down, but none of that was captured in the paper. What do you think happened? What do you think it was Major Bailey, or do you think it was something else? Do you think it had anything to do with the fact that she was about to buy another property near a white neighborhood?
It's hard, man. Like, so the sewer was near the plant?
That's where she was found. Like, it
Right.
drained. Yeah.
It's really hard because, like you say, we don't know enough about anybody in the case, really, to know, like, was Bailey bad or good, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I think the only telling piece is that the all-white jury couldn't convict him. So that, I think, says so much. I mean, it's Jim Crow is, like, alive and well in that period of time. So, I mean, you go across all cases in history of the threatening, like you talked about when you gave the context of that white people did not want, integrated neighborhoods and stuff like that. So it just sounded like a very brutal, like, beating. So
very brutal. And to be clear, the first jury was all white. It didn't tell me if the second jury was all white or not, but I assume.
I mean, you could assume it.
That the first one was, the second one was. If not, it was predominantly white, I'm assuming. I feel like a good coroner could have deduced a lot of clues and been able to give us physical evidence.
Got a modern CSI on it.
So there could have been clues on her person, on her clothes and things like that. And they didn't talk about any of that. So I don't know if that meant they didn't have any or if that meant they didn't look.
Right. In those cases when they open it back up with new technology, that'd be cool.
I would be surprised if any evidence was even preserved.
God, it's so frustrating
Yeah, it's really frustrating.
and heartbreaking.
And Willina, you don't start to see any descriptions of personality until you get to the 70s when Willina is awarded Teacher of the Year, and she's described as just, I think the term they used was ladylike. And so, and like compassionate and very good at teaching, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just have this image of her being this compassionate, kind, soft-spoken woman, but that doesn't mean that Rose was like that. We don't know, but I bet you Rose would have been so proud of her daughter. The fact that Rose got it together and was like, you're taking piano lessons, you're learning piano, you're going to college.
That's what I was thinking too. Like that kind of mom is really pushing her kid.
Yeah. That's also what makes me like to think maybe Rose also was, or Willie was good at music.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
You can kind of make guesses about what maybe Rose was like based off how Willina ended up, but that's not even always the truth.
But it's so shit. Yeah, like you're saying, like even in the 1800s, we get when the white women are on trial or whatever, or even victims, you get more character accounts of like what they were like, even if it's dumb, right?
Yeah. It's always dumb. Like
nothing in this.
Like they tell them what they're wearing and they call them awful names and things, but strumpet, those kinds of things. But well, that in those cases too, lots of times I'll have access to the court records through the Old Bailey. And so maybe that's what I'm saying. Maybe there are databases that hold this, but I don't have access to them.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is somewhere a court record that has all these transcripts that I don't have access to that would have given this a much fuller picture than I was able to provide. But I didn't want, I was like, I'm not going to get that in the next week. So I still wanted to tell parts of this story because this was this is just from the newspapers and this was just for a few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so crazy to me. It is such, I was like, she was what? She died how? She was found where?
Blow up.
Yeah, I thought this one's going to be everywhere. How have I not heard of this? And there is no book about it. There's no articles about it.
Really?
There's nothing. It's all only in the paper. And it didn't even go into, like, I wanted to know more about what hair products did she make? What was the name of it? What did it look like? Because all of that is so impressive and interesting. And what was it called? Nothing. It said hair dressings often or hair products. I don't know.
Okay, got it.
I'm not sure what it was. Anyway, what are your last words?
I mean, one, it's just evidence enough of like the sign of the times, how little coverage there is in this late in history, right?
And it still happens today. There is constantly talks about how when Black women or women of color go missing, they're not covered in the same way as when white women go missing.
Right. It is the year of 2024.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine being a Black woman in those times and facing that daily and doing everything that she did, which is just like really striving for generational wealth and setting her daughter up for success. And I mean, in those times is just like incredible.
Unbelievable. Again, we don't know what kind of mother Rose was, but she absolutely set her daughter up and her grandkids up, and I'm sure she has great grandkids, to have a very different existence than what she had.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah, agreed.
It's an awful, awful ending.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't know, but I have to think, I always feel like when a husband or a wife dies so soon after.
Yeah.
And we don't know Willie's age, right? Because they were all over the map, but he certainly wasn't old enough for it to be like, well, he was 100.
Yeah.
You have to think that having to go through 2 trials, and either you're thinking the police are certain it's Major Bailey and they're not putting any time into looking into her case anymore, or it is Major Bailey and I knew him for almost 15 years.
Yeah, both are awful
absolute
options.
Anxiety and heavy weight of that.
Yeah, the stress would just kind of pull you apart.
Into his health or his life. It had to affect him. All right, well, who should listen?
Wow. Atlanteans, for sure. Property owners. Take some inspiration from her. I think just generally, I'd like everyone to listen, and just because, like you said, like you had to really dig around for this, and it was such a small case for such a sensational murder, if you have to put it that way.
Yeah.
And just historians FBI just being more conscious of this. And like if there are old cases like this and there is evidence and it's never got wrapped up, maybe you could wrap it up and, save a lot of pain or start healing pain for a family.
Yeah, for sure. And
Wow.
listeners out there, if you've come, I don't know who's digging into the 1940s and 50s newspapers like me, but if you happen to know of a case, or maybe it happened in your family, or maybe you've heard about it from living in the town, and there's, please send it our way, because if I can find enough to cover it, I will. That's often the crux I come up against, is that I just can't find enough on it. So if you have anything like that, please send it our way. I'd love to cover more stories that are just more obscure, because I think they're interesting and I think they deserve to be heard.
Definitely. I'm so glad that you brought this one up, even though
it's very sad.
Very heartbreaking.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week, and you are going to take the reins again.
Yeah.
I love it when you do that. I can't wait to sit back with a tea and just let it all wash over me.
It's going to be interesting.
It always is. Well, thank you so much for listening. You can rate, review, like, subscribe, send us recommendations for Teas and Crimes. And I forgot to do this last time. You can find us on all the platforms at
Tea Time Crimes.
You can email us at
teatimecrimes@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I was editing and I was like, did I cut some of this out? I forgot to ask her. She didn't use it. Because you have such a Tea Time Crimes. It's always so intense. And I'd forgotten this. Well, if you were listening, you probably knew how to find us anyway. See you next week. Bye.
Good.